Steve, another week has gone by. The weather is beautiful. Spring has sprung here. I'm looking at you and you're wearing a beanie indoors, so I'm assuming it's quite cold. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. All the better for catching up with you. It's always nice to see your happy little smiley face. Spring has certainly sprung. I don't know what sort of spring, looking out of my window, but something has sprung.
Beautiful balmy days are here.
Beautiful balmy days.
Before we get going, your mug, who was on that? Audrey Hepburn?
Audrey Hepburn, breakfast at Tiffany's. She was a lovely lady, classy.
What happened to those kind of women?
What happened to those sort of Hollywood stars? That's what I'd like to know.
What are we talking about?
Time back in the Royal Navy, and obviously both of us were very, very fortunate in our years of service that we did actually manage to get around the country and around the globe. And so 3 top runs ashore that you might have had. There can be numerous reasons. When I was thinking about how I could answer this, I thought to myself, man, that's quite difficult because there's so many beautiful countries that I've been to and there's so many great people that I've met. And to try and distill, goodness knows how many countries I've been to around the world, into just 3 is really hard work. What are your thoughts?
Exactly the same. I struggle to put them down to 3 because it leaves out so many great places. I've decided not to do any UK because obviously that was home and we were there. But they were some of the best runs ashore. Plymouth, fun enough. Newcastle
was a brilliant run ashore.
The Toon. However cold it is, the ladies still go out in skimpy gear. It's unbelievable.
Fantastic place, Newcastle, man. Eh?
And I don't know if you remember, there was a discotheque where you'd perambulate with the ladies. There was a revolving stage. And it was that great moment that I'll never forget. There was a band playing, and then suddenly I come conscious, and it was a disco. And I thought, what's happened? Have we moved? And I did not remember. And it was only many weeks later that someone said, no, it's revolving stage.
Funny.
Well, it was funny at the time.
Yeah.
So I'm not including the UK, and I'm also not including New Zealand. I mean, it really impressed me when I first came down here in '84, but I'm not going to include that. So I agree with you, it's been very difficult. And we may repeat some of them, won't we?
We might. We'll see how we go. So kick off then, Sunshine. What's one of your best runs?
Well, before I answer that, I'm actually going to do something completely different.
And now here's something completely different.
Hey, this is me. You should be used to this by now. When we talk about foreign runs, I think there's 3 things in my mind I'd like to put out there that we should always be mindful of. One is that it was an education in itself. We were young lads who joined at 16, and we'd probably never gone much further than the nearest town or city. Occasionally you get to the coast for a holiday. But you go abroad, the other side of the world, different cultures. Wow, what an education that was.
Into foreign parts?
Yes, that's right. Parts that were foreign, an eye-opener. The second point I'd like to say is that we didn't do it on our own. We went with other people. And looking back, it was great to have done it with other people, such as yourself. Because a lot of the people that we went with were slightly older than us, and in a way, they were mentors. Because I was going to places like you were, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Still young, but you're having guys with you that were much older than you, much more wiser, and that they gave you the ability to say, look, this is how you behave when you are ashore. This is how you should behave in a pub when you're having a few drinks. In other words, great gurus in a way of life. Looking back as to my favourite run ashores, they were favourite because I shared it with others who had that mentality. However drunk you were, they always got you back to the ship. And the third is the fact that they're memories. 40 years later, we can remember some of these shores, these places we went to, and the experiences. Well, probably not you, Steve. You don't remember your last run ashore much in Gibraltar, I know that. They are memories, and they do stick with you for a lifetime.
One of the great beauties of doing it as we did it was we did it in the company of some great fellas who had already done it before us, so they've already been round the traps and they knew the lie of the land. But we also did it in a great era, I think, in a period of time where the world was really opening up in a way that it hadn't done for a long time, even post the Second World War. We were still on that upward opening up trajectory where there was still interesting things to explore. And as you say, foreign travel was really, really limited. I don't think I ever went abroad with my parents into foreign parts. I think as far as we got was Scotland, and that was a mission. So for kids today who fly all around the world, who travel all around the world, this is, you're kidding me. But for us, back in our day, travelling outside the bounds of your county boundary were pretty rare. Certainly in the village that I grew up, loads of people never travelled very far. And so for me to be deploying to the Middle East and then going to all of these foreign parts was really interesting to folk back in the village. It's a bit like Hobbiton. You know, don't go out of the boundaries of the Shire, Master Frodo.
That's strange, because put a hat on you and you'd look like Gandalf. I'd look like a hobbit. My first excellent run ashore was Gibraltar. It was actually my first run ashore that was not in the UK. And got down there in 82. You'll know, when you leave Plymouth, you could have nice weather, but generally it isn't. And you only have to steam south across the Bay of Biscay and it suddenly starts to perk up. And by the time you're hitting the coast of Portugal and going by, it's becoming a completely different world. And by the time you're getting through the Straits of Gibraltar into the Med, it is a completely different world. When you see the rock appear on the horizon for the first time, especially if it's got the Levanta, that long cloud over it, it's a magical sight. Gibraltar, although it's the Mediterranean and it faces Africa, it's like being in an English town. I'm sure the Spanish Gibraltarians may say differently, but it was just a great place to be introduced to a different climate and a different place, but still have this almost Englishness. It felt like home, and I love Gibraltar.
Gib was a great stopping off place, wasn't it? And it was that home from home, but still overseas. And it was always a really good opportunity to let your hair down. I can understand why you'd like that.
I was gifted, unlooked for, a long stay, because I posted on the Aurora Facebook group just recently about, I couldn't remember the date. Turns out no one else can remember the dates. But just before the Falklands, we got to Gibraltar. Spring train had happened, an annual exercise out in the Med. We were steaming away somewhere and we had to turn around. Now, some people have this memory that the Falklands had happened. We were steaming south. We transferred over all our stores to the Coventry because we were anti-submarine warfare. We weren't going to go much further. And then we came back and they may have got something stuck round the propeller. So the ship had to go into dry dock for about a month and a half. And everybody was taken off the ship. I ended up at RAF North Front, which was the closest you can get to the Spanish closed border at that time. Which meant I would walk to the ship all the way through the town. So I got to know Gibraltar really well and was there long enough that we got leave, and then I literally going up the rock. Me and Del Ravalde, all right, Del, I know you're listening, we're at the top of the rock and clay pigeon shooting. And it was just this magical view all the way over to Africa. Clear day, and you can see Algeciras and into Spain. Brilliant. So I got to know it very quickly.
If I'm to be honest with you, mate, when I got to Gib, I didn't really do very much in Gibraltar other than walk up the rock. Your recollection of Gibraltar is probably far more nuanced than mine. You come through a tunnel through the rock onto a beach area, which was like a pebbled beach area. And I can remember going down there with a couple of lads, Doc Savage and co. And we would be bronzy on the beach. I didn't really engage much with anything else outside of the drinking establishments in Gibraltar. It was just that great place to get off the ship and wet your whistle. Let your hair down.
And there was a set run, wasn't there? You came out the dockyard gates, and the first one, I think, if I remember, there was a little roundabout, or you go across and then you're into the main drag, and there was the Donkey's Flip-Flop, which was the horseshoe. If you went further on, it was towards the Barrel House. There was a shed load. So Gibraltar was memorable because the sheer amount of times that I ended up going there, because every time I deployed, it was always through the Med to Egypt to go out to the Gulf and then coming back. So it was always the stopping off point and it was always the first point. So that's my memory.
Again, favourites is really difficult. There are so many places that I'm so fortunate to have travelled and so many different things that I've seen. So I guess what I've tried to do is look at things that would have made some of the biggest impact in my thinking about things, as opposed to just entertainment or just going out there for the hell of it or having a good time partying hard and all of that sort of thing. I think one of the first countries that we came to as I deployed as a young fella and really surprised me, sort of shocked me, coming out of a very nice county in England and suddenly finding yourself here, was when we got to the Suez Canal and I was able to get off at the top end of the canal and then meet the ship at the bottom end of the canal, and they'd do like tours in between. So I got off and I went down into Cairo in Egypt and got to go to the pyramids at Giza, and all of that, the smell, the heat, the fact that back in the day then you could actually climb up the flipping pyramids, you know, you were allowed to climb up and get up there. So I'm stood there clambering up these dirty, great big pyramids, thinking, I'm just a skinny white boy from the UK, 16, 17 years old, and I'm in the middle of flipping Egypt. And I'm stood on the pyramids that I've seen in school books, and here I am. Take a picture. And blow me, aren't these stones flipping big? And how the hell did they do that? And why is the town just in spitting distance? This should be in the middle of nowhere. The way the photographs are taken all looks like it's out in the middle of the desert. And so things like that really surprised me. And then the hotel that we stayed at, because we obviously had a couple of nights as the ship was transiting through the canal, was right near a cemetery. And so you'd got like wailing going on during the day and the night. I was still on the balcony looking out over a cemetery in one end and bustling aspects of Cairo in another, and everything was sensory overload. And as a young fellow, I thought to myself, man, this is incredible. How on earth did I end up out here? It's just bonkers.
I loved Egypt as well. In fact, strangely, one of the coldest evenings I've ever known in my life was in Egypt. We did a Sod's Opera just before we went through the canal, and it was so cold. It was November. Alexandria. Went there a couple of 3 times. There's a guy posted on the Aurora a memory, because you know I had the monkey. I had it on the Aurora as well. So it's like this puppet monkey. We went out in uniform. We was in whites. And I had this monkey on my arm. And we were all in a horse-drawn carriage. But the horse kept panicking because I was there with this monkey. It nearly bolted. The guy couldn't control it. We nearly ended up going through the streets at the high rate of knots. Fabulous place. And the food, fantastic.
It was a real opening up of your mind to different people. Obviously, Britain is a multicultural society, but you didn't meet that many foreigners in my part of England. It was a very traditionally Anglo-Saxon part of England. And so suddenly being thrust in the middle of all of these Egyptians and all of the different, as you say, sights, smells, foods, everything, and recognising, man, there's some really good people around here. I'm sure that people got into strife, and I have some vague memories of people getting in aggravation with the locals. But I repeat what I've said before. The vast majority of countries that I've been to, the people that I've met, the real people, have been incredible. And I have quite a low view of humanity in many regards. But the people that I have met on my travels have just been super. People that could really rip you off. And I've got no doubt that as a youngster you were ripped off anyway, and they made a few more bucks out of you than they should have done. But they were kind while they did it. They ripped you off with a smile, which was great.
We have said this in a previous episode, and I remember talking to you about this on the Charybdis. How is it that when you go to these places, and some of them compared to the level of life, housing, transport and so on that we were used to in the UK, it was much lower then. They used to call them the third world. They got rid of that now. It's developing countries. And yet they were always happy, smiling. And why is it then you got back to Britain miserable as anything half the time? It was so marked, so noticeable that was one abiding memory I'll always have. How friendly the people were when you went abroad.
And the Middle East gets a bit of a bad rep, right? It gets these countries get a bit of a bad rep in the news that we get put out today. It's always people being killed and Islamic fundamentalists running riot and everybody's horrendous. I don't know what it's like there now. I've not been back to Egypt for many, many years. But when I was there, it was nothing like that. I felt perfectly safe wandering around the streets. I felt perfectly safe going off into different places. If anybody had had a go at me for something, there would have been people in the crowd that would have come out and helped me rather than join in. So the average person on the street, I think, would have been fantastic. Maybe I'm naive to think that back in the day. Maybe they wouldn't have done. But from what I saw and my experiences, it was really good. Going through Egypt, having that experience, Cairo and obviously later on Alexandria and through the Suez and all of those sights and sounds and being able to put your hands into history, going back so many thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Really poignant. So that stands out to me as one of my Royal Naval best ventures. So you've gone for Jib, you're on your travels now. What hit you next?
Every time I deployed, unlike you, it was always east. It was always to the Indian Ocean. There was one deployment I went out to the Far East, which for the Aurora guys, we don't mention the name because they get upset. Orient Express it was called. You and I on the Charybdis went to the Indian Ocean. And you're out there steaming around various places, and it's quite a hard graft. You're at sea for some long times. The Navy was always very good at putting you into a place for some R&R, and you could be there for a couple of 3 weeks, enough to either have folks fly out to meet you or go off. And therefore, my next one is Mombasa, Kenya. Anybody listening to this who's Navy, ex-Navy, and you yourself, Steve, if I said the Seaman's Mission, the casino, then probably some of the hotels, Diani,
Sunshine Bar,
Oh, Sunshine Bar. Well, yeah. You'll know what I mean. And also those tusks.
Yes.
So a magical place. And if I'm correct, I think Mombassa's on an island in a river. So you anchor up in a river. And of course you get time off and you would go, well, I did once or twice actually, went on to safari, went to Savo West, Kilimanjaro. Fantastic. And it's quite a long drive to get there and back. Fascinating place, Kenya. Very nice, friendly people. And the first time I went there, and this really set the course of history for me, it's because of the Falklands. We went out there in 82. Britain had committed to what was known as the Armilla Patrol, so they always had 2 ships on deployment in the Gulf or there and thereabouts. Well, of course, a lot of the ships went south to the Falklands. HMS Aurora, which was Ikara, which was anti-submarine, no need, so we went out to the Gulf, but we needed another ship, so New Zealand gifted us, first of all, the Canterbury, and then the Waikato, and we went to Mombasa with the Waikato, and they were literally next to us. Fantastic memory. You had to be careful. You wouldn't want to be on your own going through town. You always had to be with a couple of 3 others, but it was just a brilliant place, great memories. And that beach, because of the reef, fantastic.
I've got Kenya down as one of my top 3 places, and Mombasa. Go into Mombas and you'd hit up on all of the various hotels and seedy joints and get out on trips. As you say, it was one of the great things that the Navy did for us, if you wanted to take advantage of it, is that they would have the ship's liaison officer, who would have all of these pre-arranged venues that you could visit, pre-arranged trips that you could go on, you'd sign up and get out on them. So I did exactly the same as you, but I don't think I did it with you. I did it with Paul Kelsall and a couple of others, Dave Winchester and a couple of other lads. We went out to the Giardini Beach Hotel and we stayed up there, and from there we went out to the Tsavo National Park on safari. And then we stayed in the Mount Kilimanjaro Safari Lodge, which is the log cabins in the middle of everywhere. And again, I'm just wandering around these places thinking, man, I come from an old Roman town. And here I am in Africa, for goodness sake. This incredible continent. Wilbur Smith was some books that we'd read at the time, wouldn't it? Back in the day, yeah. The Courtney families and all of this sort of stuff. So Africa was the stuff off fiction. And now here I am in Africa. And not only am I in Africa, I'm on a safari in Africa, and I'm staying out at Mount Kilimanjaro. Mount Kilimanjaro, man. It was amazing. The African plains and the beautiful sunset as it comes down over the plain. Oh, beautiful place. And the Kenyan people, I found they were incredible. I did what you shouldn't do in Kenya. So I must have been, 17, maybe 18. I just went walkabout on my own. In the middle of flipping nowhere, down dusty old streets, getting dark, people just looking at you, say, skinny little white boy walking along the streets. And I went to a church because it was beautiful singing, and I was the only white face in amongst the sea of the congregation. And the preacher grabbed hold of me and pulled me out the front of the church. So he spoke to me in English. He says, where are you from? I said, oh, England. Bring us a word from the church. And I'm thinking, I haven't got a word from the church. I don't even know what I'm doing here. Great coastline, great beaches, brilliant memories from going away with the lads out on those trips. And yeah, fantastic time.
I've got a couple of strange memories. One does involve Dave Winchester. We went to the Seamen's Mission and a guy came over and said, do you want some of these nuts or something? And he's got a strong accent. And Dave was one of these guys that if he heard an accent, he couldn't stop himself repeating it. And he talked just like them back in. This guy thought he was taking the pee, but it wasn't. You go there, and of course you learn Jambo Bwana.
Jambo, Jambo Bwana, habari gani, nzuri sana.
You buy all the safari tops and t-shirts and all that. But at the Seamen's Mission, it was a very staid and very polite place, and you just go there for a few drinks. And it had gardens. And we were walking down the garden, I forget who it was, I think it was Dave Stockford and I from the Aurora. And suddenly, a guy ahead of us screamed, ah! Like a girl. And he said, look up. And we looked up, and it was the biggest tarantula, literally dangling off a web. It was huge, disturbingly big. And none of us would want to go forward. We had to go past it to get to where we wanted to get. And I can't remember what it was, probably the bar. And we wouldn't walk by. So how do we get back? Can we retrace our steps? Until someone said, look, we're in the bloody Navy. We're military, for Christ's sake. Just go on. And we edged past this thing, which normally if you walked would take a second. It took us about 2 minutes to get past this tarantula. We were bricking it. I always remember that, and that was just one of those vague memories I have. And also you and I having a drink. I don't know if it was the Sunshine Bar, and we'd often meet there and have a few drinks. I remember that, and then go off to the casino, which I've seen pictures of. It's small. This thing wasn't great. It was actually on top of a so-called restaurant where you could go down and have breakfast.
I can't remember. I can remember the Sunshine Bar because it was quite ropey. I can remember the Florida Hotel because it wasn't as ropey as the Sunshine Bar. And I can remember some of the antics that were going on around me in these various places, which I won't go into on this channel. But there was certainly some very colourful activity going on in various places.
I want to know what channel you would go into it.
Yeah, and I can remember the Giardini Beach Hotel where we stayed and that national park. One of the things that got me about the national park was you're out there in these log cabins and there's no fences. And I'm thinking, I've got to walk from this log cabin, which is out in the Wop-Wops, and I've got to get to the restaurant area, which is over there. And that's a distance, and I've got to do that at night with no light, and there's lions. So I'd sort of poke my head out the door and I'd do a left and right and think, so do I have a green to go type of thing, you know? Silly little things, but these are the types of thoughts that would run through my head when I was there. What happens if some dirty great big elephant decides to wander in, or some mangy old lion decides that he wants to sort of pick out a tourist, fancies this chicken wing?
When the Aurora went to Cairns in Australia in '83, we was anchored in the river and you had to walk along crocodile-infested waters to get into the town. And they said, don't go alone, because there had been a guy a week before who had been taken by a crocodile. I thought, why'd they put us here?
Last on my list, China. We went up the Yangtze River into Shanghai. This is back in the day when China was nowhere near as developed. It was not open to the Western world. It was very closed shop. Really fascinating. It was underdeveloped. Everybody rode push bikes. Nobody had a car. And again, I managed to get on some tours. I ended up going to a tapestry factory where they were weaving silk. That was quite amazing. I was also able to get on a steam train ride into some ruins, and I cannot remember what they were called. Again, I'll have it noted somewhere. And it was a really long steam train ride. And I can remember being just stood on the platform as this old steam train comes with the hammer and sickle on the front of the cab. And then it's all wooden carriages with waitress service. It is the place that I probably had the very best cup of tea that I've ever had, served up in a really lovely china bowl with no handle and just big tea leaves laid out on the base of the china cup. And you could just see the infusion working as you're travelling along. It was just incredible. Again, it was just the whole exposure to a completely different way of doing life to what I'd been used to and what I'd grown up in. And I think all of these things, all of these little things that the Navy sort of seeded in terms of our travel, start to shape your thinking, and they start to open your mind as well to other opportunities and to other cultures and to other ways of considering how to do things. And so I think that travel, if you allow it, is a really good way to actually broaden not only your physical horizons, but your mental horizons.
When were you there?
85, 86, maybe.
The film Empire of the Sun, based on J.G. Ballard's book, excellent book, that was 87. It was the first time a major Western film unit had gone into China to film. Spielberg wanted that famous concourse, I don't know what they call it, along the river, beautiful, famous buildings. So you would have been perhaps the first to go there for a long time, weren't you?
We were the first warship in there, sort of forever type of thing, you know, and it was a very, very big thing that they had let the Royal Navy in. I can remember coming alongside, and stood on the jetty there was the ambassador, or one of the diplomats from China who was stood there. And he was your archetypal 1930s, 1940s, overseas colonial office type of looking chap, with the beige trousers and the straw boater and the dicky bow and the cane. And it was just like stepping back into something like from the Agatha Christie era. It was incredible. And the Chinese were incredibly hospitable as well. We had some massive banquets put on for us, and we went out to all these places where we were all sat round the tables, and every time you raised a glass you had to make a toast. And so the lads caught on really quickly that if you made a toast, everybody had to drink. So everybody was making the toast, and it would be, to Her Majesty the Queen, yeah, toast, yeah. To the Duke of Edinburgh, yeah, toast, yeah. To Prince Charles, oh yeah. And you work your way through the whole royal family and everybody that was a hanger-on in the royal family just to raise a glass. And so it was quite spectacular in that regard. So different. And I've got some amazing photographs that I took, well, I think they were amazing. Some of the things that I captured had resonance with me. Going back to that tapestry place that I went to, one of the girls there, I was watching her and she was weaving a silk picture of Her Majesty the Queen, Queen Elizabeth. She had done all of her face and got her down to the top half of her shoulders. And that was just brilliant. So, took lots of photographs of her doing this sort of stuff.
My next one, Hong Kong. Now it's China, but it wasn't China then. This was years before the handover, and I do apologise to those listening who served on HMS Aurora that did not go to the deployment that shall not be named, but we ended up in Hong Kong, and, well, when you are on Hong Kong looking over towards Kowloon and the Star Ferry's coming across, you've got HMS Tamar you can pop into, or you go down to the Wan Chai, we can go up to Victoria Peak on the funicular. It's unbelievable. This was 1984. I've not been ever since. Classy place, absolutely stunning architecture. You can go down a little crowded road full of tenements and suddenly come across something that was from the Victorian era. Small, dwarfed by everything around it. It breathes vibrancy, Hong Kong, especially at night. Balmy nights, and you're probably high up, Victoria Peak, looking down and all the lights are on. There's nothing like it. And I loved going down to Aberdeen Harbour. We went, a couple of us, on the Jumbo floating restaurant, which sadly sank, I think, recently. It's a magical place, very much of its time, because it was British police and the Navy had a presence there. I think there was a couple of minesweepers. A few naval personnel were stationed out there, if I'm correct. The China Fleet Club was still operating, but how much longer, I don't know, because the presence of the Navy began to ebb away. Brilliant memories. Whether I would want to live in Hong Kong, I'm not too sure. I would have been very happy if I was ever stationed there, long time. I'm really pleased that I saw it when I did. I worked with a lady who lived in Hong Kong for many years. Her daughter still does. It has gone through some troubled times, of course. It's still officially a free port. It will be for 50 years since the handover. It's still a great place to go and visit. Spectacular. And as you say, the people were very welcoming. It's a wonderful place.
Yep, I would agree. Hong Kong was a great place. Great fun, great people, great sights and sounds. The harbour area and the way people were living, really fascinating.
Did you get to go there in the Navy?
Yeah, I did. I'm just very grateful to the Royal Navy for having the opportunity to be able to do what we did. I think it was absolutely superb. And as a young man, 16-year-old, 17-year-old, before you even got to 20, you'd been all around the flipping world. I mean, that was absolutely amazing. The opportunities that they put on for us to be able to go and visit different places and to be able to see different things was really mind-expanding, if you wanted it to be. I mean, there were other things that would expand your mind. Those cultural aspects were just fantastic, so I thoroughly enjoyed that.
Yeah, I agree. Very fond memories of the travel. The Grey Funnel Line was a great way in which to see the world and get paid doing it. Like I said at the very beginning, I don't think it would have been the same without the men, that went along with, including yourself, Steve. Just brilliant. All the memories of young fellas doing bizarre things in wonderfully hot, often, places that you probably would not be able to go to or would go to outside of the forces. And it was just a great experience. I feel very privileged to have done so. And, more importantly, I feel doubly privileged now talking about it, being able to talk it with someone who also did it. So thank you for that, Steve.
Good stuff, fella.
Until next time.
Take care.